I had the pleasure of introducing our speakers today for the CI Compass webinar. We have Suren Byna and Hanqi Guo, both from the Ohio State University. Suren is a professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at OSU, and is also a visiting faculty scientist with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, while Hanqi is an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at Ohio State, and he also holds a joint appointment with the MCS division at Argonne National Laboratory. So both Suren and Hanqi, they have this perspective of data management and visualization from the perspective of DOE facilities and labs, as well as their current research in these areas. So I will give the floor to Suren to start off, and then Hanqi will go after him. Thank you again.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and provide our recent progresses or advances that we have been doing. So this is, at least in my presentation, I kept it a little high level because of the number of activities that are going on. So I will focus on the scientific data management side, and the Hanqi will be talking about the visualization side. So as Anirban was mentioning, that I am Suren Byna, and I'm a professor at the Ohio State University, and I also work at Lawrence Berkeley Lab as a visiting faculty. I joined here about 2.5 years ago. Before that, I was at Lawrence Berkeley Lab as a senior scientist. Okay, so I think to this crowd, it doesn't need a lot of introduction. That scientific data lifecycle includes both the data production, movement, the data storage, and analysis, where it involves movement. But the problems we notice is that all these data generations and storage access, a lot of it goes through these versions of files. And we notice several inefficiencies in file systems, how the data is stored in the files, layouts, and all those things. And then also depending on where the data is stored and where the data is accessed, whether it is locally or remotely, there are so many inefficiencies. And much of the burden falls on the scientists or users of this system. So what we have been doing is how to develop efficient data management that makes things easy for scientists and users. Okay, so the data management portfolio we have at Berkeley as well as OSU is we have been working on data management libraries and systems, and the data management services, and storage and IO performance optimizations. And then we work with a lot of these applications to support usage of these systems, as well as how to optimally use them. Okay, I'll go into each one of these 3 blocks on the top, and then maybe go into a couple of them a little deeper. Okay, but overall, this is still at a very high level. I haven't gone into the implementations of these things, but if there is any question about it for deep information, I can either point to the place where we can get more information, or I can answer them. Okay, all right. So the data management libraries, we work heavily with a library called the HDF5, or hierarchical data format, because it has been heavily used in scientific workloads. So we started working with HDF5 almost 12 years ago from my side, but HDF5 software itself has been there for more than 25 years now. What we noticed with HDF5 is it was heavily used for storing the data, but when it comes to large-scale systems, it hasn't been properly optimized. So what we looked at before the exascale computing project and during the exascale computing project we started working on how to optimize HDF5 to work on very large scale systems. And in that process, we developed a new feature called virtual object layer, which allows intercepting the HDF5 API, and then internally you can route the calls to in any alternative implementations of the storing the data or accessing the data or doing performance analysis and all those things. Okay, so that's what this the architecture of virtual object layer helps. So using that virtual object layer infrastructure, we started developing something called asynchronous I/O. So asynchronous I/O is where when you have a pattern of computation and I/O kind of interleaving, while the computation is going on, you can perform the I/O asynchronously without stopping the computation completely, just stalling that. Okay, so using some kind of background threads approach, we have been doing this asynchronous I/O, which reduces the latency, data movement latency on large scale systems significantly. In very efficient way of hiding the latency can achieve pretty much no I/O cost, because we store the data using the caching or prefetching approaches to the node local storage or node local memory, and then data is then dumped from there to the storage or read using prefetching techniques. So that hides a lot of the I/O latency. So that's where we also developed this caching and prefetching layer in HDF5. Another effort we have been we worked on is automatically tuning the I/O performance depending on how the file layout or file is structured, or the data is coming from multiple processes to the files. We organize the data in a way that it can it can utilize the parallel file systems efficiently. So that's another work we have done. And as part of that, we created a HDF5 benchmark suite, exercising a large number of these optimizations as well as a large number of patterns that appear in a lot of the applications. So that using H5 bench can give ideas on how to design application I/O using HDF5. Okay, so that's the overall HDF5 packages that we have developed, and we have done other work in streaming optimizations, multiple readers, multiple writers, or single writers, multiple readers. So all those optimizations we developed as well. So many of them went into HDF5 software. Anybody who is using HDF5 can get all these available. The next thing that we did based on this is that HDF5 is still file management, right? Like the data is stored in files, and then you're storing and accessing from files. But we then looked at why people have to manage files. So why not just access the data as if it is memory objects, similar to what the database management systems are doing. I mean, there the concept of the table, and then you're only interacting the data with something called tuples. Okay? So why not we just use the same thing, same abstractions here, like memory object, and then all the data movement, metadata management, data analysis, metadata querying, transformations, and all these can be performed using a runtime system. So that's what we came up with, a new system called proactive data containers that hides a lot of the data management overheads in the system, and the users don't get exposed to how files are managed, how the data is moved, and all those things. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. And looking at the time, it's already 10 minutes over, so I'll speed up. Again, the other data management services aspect, what we are doing is assessment of the AI readiness of the data. So the data, if you give garbage to AI, you are going to get garbage models. So how do we assess the data quality and data fairness, privacy, and all these things before you use the data? So to give quantitative measures and then evaluating whether they are meeting the required thresholds, and then if they are not, how to optimize or how to improve those is what we wanted to explore. So this AI ADREN or AI Data Readiness Inspector toolset is for assessing the metrics and fixing any issues. So I'll talk a little bit about that one as well. And then we also have another project recently started, the securing the self-describing data libraries and formats. So the HDF5, NetCDF, audios, and all these things were created a long time ago, well before the cybersecurity is a major concern. So what are there specific processes that we need to develop to make them, make all these data management libraries secure, secure from memory problems, as well as any other threats that might be malicious threats that are trying to change the data or change the way that people access the library itself. So that's where we are looking at fine-grained encryption methods for metadata and data, digital signatures for library plugins, because many of these libraries can be enhanced with new functionalities. One of the things that I mentioned in the previous slide, virtual object layer, is a plugin approach that you can expand the functionality of the library. But those could be malicious and all those things. So how do you make sure that the proper way of using those is what we are looking at there. So we're developing a framework for implementing these methods and all those using some runtime system to avoid the overhead of security as well. And just a quick mention about the Store Hub. We are trying to work on a reconfigurable storage system that is targeted for data management researchers. So this is a pilot project that we are trying to come up with an infrastructure for storage researchers. I'll talk a little bit about ADREN. We also work on sparse data management. What are the efficient file formats, native file formats for storing sparse data? And we are exploring this in the area of relational algebra applications, but there are a lot of applications that use sparse data. So we are trying to come up with those formats. And we have done a significant amount of work in metadata querying and management. So how to develop indexing strategies for searching large number of metadata attributes, up to billions of them. So we developed many a series of indexing techniques like SOMETA, DART, MIX, and DDMs. So all these make the data, the metadata search much faster than the traditional KV stores, such as the Redis or MongoDB and all those things were much faster. And then we also developed some provenance capturing and management systems for AI workflows called ProvIO. So that is also another work. The other piece is understanding and the tuning of IO performance. We have done a lot of work on this area as well. So there are a lot of IO performance logs being collected in different systems, but how to actually interpret, identify bottlenecks, and what are the various ways to solve those bottlenecks, and actually going and tuning the IO performance automatically is what we are working on. So there are a bunch of tools collectively called Drishti toolset. There is an Explorer, which visualizes the IO performance bottlenecks. And then we recently came up with some IO Navigator and IO Agent, which are LLM-based navigation of IO performance, and then a recommender recommends which optimizations to be performed. And then automatic tuning is a tune IO approach, which uses the reinforcement learning frameworks. Okay, so that's those are the flavors of what we are working on in our research. Just to give a brief intro to what we are doing in the PDC and Adrian, I collected this. The next few slides are talking about that. So what happens in the current pipelines, the data movement pipelines, is that the experimental observational data pipeline or simulation pipeline, the data flow path is pretty much full of files, and much of it is managed by users. So how to make this much more simple is what we are looking at in the proactive data containers. So if you take a look at the current systems of hardware or software and all those things, so there are numerous layers in the hardware and multiple layers of software also piled on each other that making them work properly, it requires a lot of tuning, and that tuning can be significantly overwhelming. And what we try to do is come up with a black box approach. And this is a project that started about 6 or 7 years ago. Can we come up with this black box technology that is very much transparent, asynchronous, high performance, scalable, and all those things? So we have been working on that. So this is where we are now, where users just have to add some metadata and tag all the things that are much more like persistent objects in memory. And those memory objects are all what they need to access when they're accessing. And all the remaining data movement in the system, within the system that has multiple layers of the hardware, and between the systems also can be managed by this runtime system. Okay. So the PDC is more like an end-to-end object-focused data management. There are no files in the user view, so internally there would be the data would be stored as files of temporary files, but users don't have to know how those files are laid out, or some data could be in memory, some data could be in storage, multiple levels of storage as well. But the runtime system takes care of how to move the data in between those layers. Okay, so it kind of unifies all types of storage and memory in the workflow, including memories and persistent storage, into a global data management continuum. So, and recently we have shown this works between multiple HPC systems and HPC and cloud. So that is the latest work we have. Okay, so this is an overall view. So the data can be stored in GPU memory, CPU memory, node level storage, and all these things. And parts of these data could be there. And the overall view that we have is the data objects, data regions, and all the related data objects are stored as containers. So this is different from Docker type of containers. This is not that at all. This is just a data container that is enhanced with a metadata, and those data containers could be interfaced with the applications directly. Okay, if anybody is interested, the code is available open source. Just search for proactive data containers and it gets you there. Yeah, and internally there are a lot of services are part of this, and it can work with HDF5 interface, PDC API, or MPIO object APIs, and all those things are also available. Okay. So yeah, if any questions are there, I can answer more. But we are doing a lot of integration that is to compress the data automatically. And now the users also can specify what type of transformations they want to do while the data is in control of the runtime system. Okay. And the other piece is the AI data readiness. So as we were looking at, okay, how bad data gives bad AI models, we looked at, there was a survey that was very motivating, which looked at some 60 papers that talked about the deep learning models based on the COVID data. And what they came up with is this particular paper came up with is because the data was pretty much there are so many problems with the data. Almost all the 62 papers that they analyzed are pretty much clinically useless. So there were so many problems, multiple data formats, quality problems, timeliness of the and bias in the data, provenance and contextual information. All these things are several problems with the data itself. So how do we ensure the data readiness for AI is a critical thing because that improves the trustworthiness. But typically, the data processing is a significantly time-consuming process, and there is no standard definition when the data is ready for AI. So whoever is processing the data, whenever they have some goal that they are saying, okay, now it is ready, they go for it and then develop the model and then all those things. And whenever there is some accuracy in all those things, based on the data that they looked at, they can say, okay, model is ready. But what we want to do is come up with a standardized approach for the data readiness evaluation, and then have, before the model is developed, have those evaluations done and spend time on model development, which is one of the costliest process, only when it is data is somewhat ready and efficiently analyzed. And then again, if the model evaluation comes back saying that the data performance meets the requirements and all those things, we can just go back and revisit the data readiness evaluation. Okay, so and then we looked at what is data readiness for AI. So we looked at various papers that are talking about data readiness. Overall, we came up with a survey on how to define it, and then we came up with a classification on pillars of the AI data readiness, which is based on the quality, understandability, and the usability of the data structure, and how it is organized in storage, and what is the value of data that is being collected, and how much is useful for AI, and also looked at the more somewhat subject to terms on fairness, representation, data governance, and all those things, and then use them for specific data readiness goals, and then say that data is ready. So we looked at, we collected a bunch of these metrics for each of these pillars, and then we came up with a tool that performs this analysis, and this is called Adrian. The tool is going to be released in this week, so that's why I'm excited and pushing the developers to release that. And it is much more comprehensive than many other tools that are there. And basically, the user can give their data, select all the criteria that they're looking for, and then the analysis gives visualizations and data readiness evaluation that can be used for checking whether it is ready or not. Okay, and then I'll skip a bunch of these depending on, because of the time restriction, but overall the tool looks somewhat like that. the data is uploaded, and then they can select all these metrics, and then the visualizations are shown this way. The summary statistics will be shown too, and then there are all these dimensions are presented to the user. Okay. And the FAIR principles are one of the major push. I think many of the CIA Compass evaluations are based on the FAIR principles. So we do provide the FAIR principle compliance with various schemas as well. So right now we support DCAT and DataCite, and it is being expanded to various other metadata standards to check whether the FAIR principles are matching in all these types of according to the metadata standards that are out there. Okay. So that is one analysis we are doing. And then we have also integrated ADRIN into a federated learning framework called Advanced Data Privacy Preserving Federated Learning Framework, or APFL. This is this is being developed at Argonne National Laboratory with Ravi Madhuri and all. Okay. I'll skip this one. Just provides the details of how the clients of federated learning it contributes the data to the main server in developing the federated learning model. Okay, and one more piece of work that we have done in the ADRIN is that because we cannot come up with all the metrics and all the evaluations on all the thresholds on our own, we also added a new customizable framework that can be added by the user. So user-defined metrics and their rules for evaluating the data, and also how to execute various remedial actions on the data so that they can clean the data for processing and making it ready. So that user-defined component is also just added, and it'll be presented at eScience this year. But the framework is ready with this component. When we release this later this week, it'll happen. Okay, so I think that is very relevant tour of various activities that we are working on, especially in the data management libraries and systems, management services, and storage and IO performance optimizations. And I will yield the floor to Hanqi to talk about the data the data visualization component. Hanqi?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Suren. Let me take over the screen sharing.
Okay. Yeah. Got it.
Let me see. Okay. So can everyone see my screen now? Yeah, full screen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, thanks, Arniba and Nicola for inviting me. So I will briefly talk about some recent advances in data visualization, especially on scientific data. So before talking to details, I want to also acknowledge my colleagues at Ohio State. Basically, Ohio State has a very long-standing history on visualization research, right? So I recently joined Ohio State 3 years ago, and before I joined Ohio State, I was at the Argonne National Laboratory doing a lot of research on multidisciplinary topics. So thanks to Suren, and also thanks to this cohort, right? So I don't have to overemphasize importance and the challenges with the scientific data, right? Basically, we are facing a data tsunami, right? So the supercomputers at the DOE and NSF facilities generate a huge amount of scientific data, right? Posing a lot of challenges in understanding and store this scientific data. So the main theme of my research is about extracting features, right? Basically, we want to have some feature-centric scientific data, because features, they can represent some insights and knowledge from scientific data, right? Basically, we research a lot of different aspects in how to deriving insights and how to establish methodology and the tools in computing these insights and features, and on how to store these insights without distortion. So I would like to highlight two aspects today. One is about how to derive these insights. Another one would be focusing on feature preserving compression, which can help store the data while preserving a lot of these insights. So one of the buzzword I'm using is features. Nowadays, it's super overloaded. So for example, in computer vision, whenever we talk about features, there may be some low-level structures like edges or corners, and they can also be some high-level structures like vehicles and other things, right? And in machine learning, and everyone talk about features and different channels, and also refer to feature vectors in a very high-dimensional space. And what we mean by the overloaded world of features in the context of scientific data, right? So here I'm not trying not to define features, right? But also starting with the example, right? For example, we can have some swirling centers in wind field, right? So this wind field, mathematically speaking, they are vector field with horizontal, vertical kind of a components, right? One example that might resonate with everyone is the tropical cyclone trajectories that we can see from a weather forecast and other visualizations, right? Basically, we can extract their trajectories and visualize them, right? So that we can use these features to enhance visualization and really to enhance our understanding over scientific data, right? And on the left-hand side, it's a similar case. This is a fluid dynamic simulation with a flow past a cylinder. So we can actually extract and track these swirling centers in this field, and we can see how the vortex street move over time, right? So features are important to science, and we want to extract these features from scientific data to help understanding. So this journey on researching feature-centric visualization started 10 years ago when I was working on a very specific problem on superconductivity in material science, right? So basically, scientists are devoted to optimize some superconducting materials, right, that can carry electrical current with zero resistance, but still this type of materials are subject to energy loss, right? And this energy dissipation correlates to the dynamics of a feature called vortices, right? So if we look at this animation, we can see a lot of these curves moving, right? But mathematically, they are one-dimensional topological defects in complex field. So apologies for the very terminology, a lot of jargons, right? But really, if we look at the 2D slice of this three-dimensional data, right, we can find some huge jumps, right, in the phase field, right? Phase field is basically the phase component of the complex field, right? So with this mathematical definition, right, we can actually extract all of them in three-dimensional space with a contour integral, right? Basically, we can identify different phases, right? So for example, if we look at this cubic mesh and the different quadrilaterals, we can identify which phase is punctured by this kind of a curve, right? And then the question is how to track them over space and time, right? So basically, we are facing 4D data instead of 3D data, right? So the idea is actually straightforward, right? So can we generalize this feature definition to 4D, right? And this is actually doable. We can actually elevate these cubes to a 4D hypercube, right? And it's similar to the definition in 3D, right? We can define a similar kind of a definition, right, with this contour integral, with the surface integral in 3D subspaces of this 4D cells. And as a result, we can form a graph-based representation of the trajectories, and we can track them and visualize them to help scientists understand the dynamics of these vortices and how they relate to energy dissipation. So this was done 10 years ago, and what I really was curious about was to how to generalize this kind of research pattern to different type of features, right? So can we generalize the same 4D methodology to other things, right? So at that time, feature tracking tools were really lacking, and these feature algorithms are hard to scale considering, exascale computing and the need for in situ visualization analysis, and also they can be hard to program considering all the data management challenges and the GPU acceleration. So basically, we identify common ground for our feature tracking algorithm as a 4D space-time meshing, right? So that we can actually generalize the same idea to different feature descriptors, right? So the left-hand side is an example of extracting ISO contours in 2D, right? So if we look at this 2D synthetic function, we can actually extract these contours by looking at this, 2x2 templates, right? We can, identify different cases and extract these 2D contours, right? So there are 3D versions, and they automatically serve as a tracking tool, right? If we generalize, if we generalize 2D data as a stack of data in 4D space-time. Right. So the similar pattern apply to vector fields, right? For example, if we think about hurricane centers, right, like what I depicted here, right? Basically, we can detect locations where the wind field vanishes, right? And we can generalize the idea to find, at one, right? So this critical point of rotation center will hit the wall of a specific cell. That requires us to elevate the spatial mesh to one-dimensional higher, right? So that we can identify these puncture faces in a virtual space-time sense, right? And then we can reconstruct trajectories. Of course, there are a lot of different challenges, like how to mesh the 4D space, how to address all kinds of ambiguities and corner cases. I won't jump into the technical details, but the beautiful thing about this system is that we provide a general tool that generalize the spatial mesh into space-time mesh, right? So basically, this is a 4D discretization for both unstructured mesh and some like regular cubic mesh with certain patterns. And then we simplified a lot of tracking problem, right? For example, for contouring problem in 3D space-time, we can generalize them in 4D so that we can extract this 4D ISO volumes, right, directly without changing the 3D algorithm or 3D feature descriptor, right? We can also simplify critical point tracking. These are correspond to like hurricane centers, roughly speaking. And we can also use the same framework to tackle the quantum vortex tracking for the superconductivity problem. And this is like a tool that we have for general purpose feature tracking. So it's called FDK. So it's a framework that builds on top of 4D triangulation, 4D meshing capability to enable robust and scalable feature tracking, and also with GPU acceleration and a lot of careful parallelization design. And more recently, my student Chongrong developed another work that extends FDK, right? So basically, we are facing a lot of data, right, that have some global motion of moving pattern, right? So this, technically speaking, is not moving a long time, right? But if we look at some fusion reactors, so this is a kind of a snapshot from the ITER simulation. ITER is a international thermal fusion kind of like a facility, right? So if we look at the physical quantities, right? So basically we are facing a domain that is twisted by the magnetic line, right? So basically the idea of this reactor is to confine very hot plasma into the container. And even worse, we have even more complicated meshes, right? So think about you have a piece of dough, right? And then you form a donut, but at the same time, you have a lot of a twisting pattern, right? So if we use the same 4D meshing scheme, right, and extrude every single triangle in a straight space-time, then we are not capturing this twisting physics. So basically, we developed some meshing tool, right, that incorporates this deforming space mesh so that we can extract and tracking these blob features, right, blob features in fusion reactors in a very efficient and accurate way. So switching gears, right? So I have talked about like how to develop general tools for extracting features, and now I'm going to talk about feature preserving compression, right? So hopefully I don't have to overemphasize how important is compression for scientific data, right? So basically, today's scientific research using simulations, right, producing extremely large data set, right? And this floating point data, right, are very difficult to compress with lossless compression. So we have a lot of like lossy compression schemes, right? Especially arrow-bounded lossy compression. So the idea of arrow-bounded lossy compression is to preserve some scientific insights of scientific data, right? So at least we have point-wise arrow control. But can this arrow-bounded lossy compression preserve science? Can this arrow-bounded lossy compression techniques preserve features and insights that scientists care, right? So the answer is no, right? So basically, these compressors, they do not consider feature descriptors, right? So here I'm going to talk about the topological descriptors, right? But if we look at the, the visualization on the right-hand side, right, we can see some dots and the lines. These are critical points and separate traces, but you can imagine, right? So basically, these points correspond to some local maximum and local minimum, and there are some like connectivities between this local maximum and the saddles and all the complicated structures in the cosmos, right? If we zoom into very detail, right? So if we can see a lot of these insights, right, are distorted by SZ3, which is a very popular used lossy compression technique, right? So the things that domain scientists, right? So they rely on these feature descriptors to characterize filament structures and cosmic webs in their simulation data, right? So here we're looking into a specific topological descriptor called Moss-Mill complexes. I'm not going to go through the details and also the definite mathematical definition, but the idea is that this is a tool to segment the domain, right? So if we look at the figure D, we can see the domain is partitioned into small patches, right? And on each small patch, the function is simply monotonous, right? And there are peak points, and there are valleys, and also there are kind of a minimum, roughly speaking, right? But the thing is that, can we keep this segmentation consistent, right, with decompressed data, right? So with this segmentation, there are some key components. For example, there are local maximum, minimum that we want to preserve, and also there are some segmentations which are ascending ones and descending ones. So the key to preserve this topological consistency is actually make the scalar value ordering, right? So if we compare the local neighborhood, right, we want to make the ordering consistent, right? So think about if we have local maximum, right, and the local maximum shifted a little bit, right, and became a false negative max, right? So think about these blue columns, they are original data value, roughly speaking, right? So, and we can see the blue ribbon, blue column, right? So at I, it's a max, right? But after compression, right, so the local max shifted to J, right? So in this case, we can actually fix this local max, right, by decreasing J and increasing I, so that I will become a local max again, right? So basically, this is the idea, right? We actually conduct a lot of these iterations to make the ordering, consistent. But the thing is that if we do local adjustment, right? So basically, the neighbors and the neighbors have the potential to be wrong, right, in topology, right? So basically, we propose the iteration strategy so that we we can fix all the kind of topology, right, with our iteration strategy, and we also prove the global convergence, right? So the entire algorithm will converge within finite number of iterations, right? And for this work, right, we actually proposed a added-based approach, right? So that means, with a compressed data, right? When data is compressed, right, we have both versions of data, basically original data and decompressed data. Basically, we want to derive addits, right? And these addits, they are correction terms, and they can be saved as some metadata together with the original data, with the compressed data, right? So that later we can use the compressor, maybe SZ3 or maybe the FP to decompress the data, and then we can patch the data so that the outcome data will have the consistent topology. So this is roughly the workflow, and we also apply the GPU parallelism, right? So there are a lot of steps, right? For example, check this false critical points, update the directions, basically update the data values so the gradient became consistent, and then we also need to fix some regular points which are not minimum and maximum because they matter for the separate traces. And one challenge is how to handle this read-write and write-write conflicts on GPUs, and we have a specific strategy to use atomic operations to help the result consistent while we fix all the topology. Okay, so this is some result for some combustion simulation data. Basically, scientists use this segmentations to characterize some like burning cells and other type of features, right? So we highlighted some false critical points, right, with this small dots and the spheres, right? And we can see that we edited SZ3's decompressed data, and now the segmentation is 100% accurate as a input ground truth data, right? And this is another example on an electron density field data from molecular simulation. So basically, these separatrices, they correspond to chemical bonds between atoms, right? And with this fixing technology, we can fully fix the topology, no matter the data is compressed by SD or ZFP or whatever compression approach. So lastly, I want to highlight some early results we do. So this is a different than topology, but really focusing on some spectrum preservation, right? So basically, a lot of data analysis algorithms use FFT, fast Fourier transform, to investigate the spectrum kind of features, right, from data, right? So here's the example is a cosmology data. I will highlight more later, right? But really, FFT is a very specialized computational graph so that if you have arrow on the input side on any single point, right, so the outcome could change, right? So this will rely on even more specific iteration strategy. So we developed some new technology, right, to fix the power spectrum in lossy compressed data, and we can guarantee this time we can guarantee bounded arrow in Fourier domain, and at the same time we can guarantee bounded arrow in spatial domain as well. And we introduce very little storage and performance overhead with GPU acceleration, and with the same compression ratio, we can preserve the spectrum feature much better. So if we look at the right-hand side, so this is from cosmology simulation data looking at the baryon density, calculating the power spectrum, and we can see if we use SZ3, the power spectrum is much off from the ground truth. And with our method, right, with the same compression ratio, we accurately bound all the frequency component within less than 1% kind of a frequency error bound. So in summary, we research methodologies and the tools to derive, compute, and store features, right, from scientific data. And there are a lot of new research opportunities, right, especially with some emerging AI technologies. I haven't talked about anything about AI today, right, but we do have a lot of like cross-cutting research on AI plus visualization, right, by using these AI technologies and also in conjunction with the data management tool, right? For example, HDF5, they have filters using SZ3 and ZFP to compress data, right? So in conjunction with all of these tools, right, we envision to generalize a lot of our methods and apply them to so many different science and scientific and non-scientific applications. So I would like to thank all the funding agencies, and I also would like to thank my team members, PhD students, postdocs on this exciting research. And now I'm happy to take questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Hanqi and Suren, for the nice presentations.